Hi guys, and welcome to tonight's Music Tech webinar. This term we're going to look at sampling. Now sampling is just a fantastic area. We've only got 4 webinars in this term, so we're going to make them as interesting as possible and try and cover as much in depth as you guys might need for both your research and your exam, and just to kind of try this stuff out. So we're going to be using Logic Pro tonight, and we're going to just do a few demos in that, but I'm just going to discuss a little bit about the history and some of the techniques and kind of how this works. Okay, if you've got any questions during the Q&A section, please feel free to ask them via Twitter at MusicTech101, where we'll take any questions that you may have. Okay, so here's what we're going to look at tonight. So what is sampling? That's the first thing. What does it all involve? What's it all about? Next thing, we're going to look at a basic history of sampling and just look at some of the various kind of sampling that happened throughout the years. We're then going to look at the components and different ways in which these are controlled and manipulated. We're going to look at different kinds of samplers. So I've just picked 3 or 4 that really stand out for me and kind of things that have driven sampling that much further. Then we're going to do a little demonstration, and then finally you can have a Q&A. So what is sampling? Now, audio sampling is manipulation and resculpting of a piece of recorded sound. Now this can take place as a whole track or individual samples, individual hits or whatever really. And the idea of sculpting is you take something and you make it something unique, or you make it something that is new really. Now there's this fantastic documentary on TED Talks by Mark Ronson. It's only 16 minutes long, but he talks about how sampling has affected music, and it's really interesting the way he looks at sampling and the way he looks at kind of his own approach to music is well worth a watch. So I've just put a little link here to the video, but if you just Google TED Talks Mark Ronson, you'll find this video, and it is truly fantastic. Some of the ways in which he uses sampling throughout his productions is out of this world. Actually, I was really impressed, and am really impressed. So definitely catch that video straight away, and that'll give you a really good insight into where it's at currently. So a basic history of sampling. I've just highlighted 5 elements here, as well as this timeline on the right hand side. So this idea of sampling really came a lot before DJing happened, but one of the big pushes forward was this idea that DJs would take a record and they would mix in other records, and then they started finding actually they could scratch it and they could reverse these and slow them down and just kind of do things with the record player or the tape decks, the decks in general, that kind of just manipulated and did weird and wonderful things with the actual tunes. And they've also found that if they had two decks together, they could actually mix in 2 songs together. And this was a fundamental push forward for sampling. The next thing, another big push forward for it, was the MIDI protocol. Now the MIDI protocol is a fantastic way of connecting a keyboard in general to a computer and actually triggering these samples. It's important to say that early on, in the computer kind of era of sampling, that the computers weren't really powerful enough to do what they do now. So what you would have is maybe, if you were looking for a piano sound, you'd record one hit on a piano, and then you'd stretch that sound across every single key on a keyboard, so 88 keys, which would give you this really thin and flimsy kind of MIDI sound. I guess the best way I can see is at school at the minute we've got these Yamaha keyboards, and they must date back to the 90s if not before, and when you play the piano on that, you can really hear that has just been one sample has been stretched across all the keys, and it's quite a thin texture, and it's quite naff. Whereas now, if you look at some of these bigger sample libraries, you get multi-layered samples where basically every trigger on every key is a unique sample, and in many cases they stack them up in velocities as well, so that basically depending on how hard you hit the key, it will trigger it to be even harder. So that's quite interesting. But computers had lack of power, and this is why you've got this split in samplers. You've got these drum machines and you've got these kind of conventional instrument samplers, and the reason for that is what a lot of people found is there was enough power to trigger individual drum hits in early day computers, and these were really effective, and you had some really good drum machines that came through, like the the Roland 808 or the 909, which are even used today, really. But they were massive in hip hop, massive in all kinds of genres, and literally. You had this verge of two different kinds of sampling genres, where you had the drum machines and you had the sampling instruments. Sampling instruments generally take up a lot more power, a lot more RAM, a lot more storage in your machine, whereas the drum machines could really sound really good with very little happening. And then finally, where we're at today is new kinds of DAWs, and the one that stands out for me at the moment is Ableton Live. Now, I just love Ableton Live. I just think it's the most amazing thing. A lot of people can't get their head around it, but it's something that I'm starting to use more and more with my students, especially in A2. Another one is FL Studio. It used to be called Fruity Loops. And these are basic DAWs, but their sole focus is around sampling, okay? So unlike the conventional DAWs of Logic, Cubase and Pro Tools, where they're really looking at recording whole tracks of audio and whole tracks of MIDI. The idea with kind of sampling DAWs is that they really are focused on how they can manipulate these samples and how they can kind of use them in different ways. And if you become familiar with those two in particular, you'll find that the scope for sampling and doing kind of dance tracks and things is so much greater than out of the box Logic and whatnot. That being said, obviously you can still create fantastic dance tunes and sample tracks in those, but you are kind of seeing this emergence of these kind of new DAWs, which is fantastic. So on the right hand side here, we've got a timeline of all the kind of basic sampling that's happened from the Rhythmicon, which was this idea of the first drum machine in 1931, and then you've got this Musique Concrète, Pierre Schaeffer and Pierre Henry. And Musique Concrète is fantastic. It was one of the studies that we did at university, actually, along with the BBC Radiophonics. Now, BBC Radiophonics, they've got a fantastic website at the minute where they kind of show you how their stuff works, and they were really responsible for the early Doctor Who and things like that. Those weird and wonderful sounds, and well worth a watch. The documentary on Radiophonics is really fantastic, actually. The next one is the Mellotron. Now, the Mellotron, the signature tune for me was definitely Strawberry Fields by the Beatles. Well worth a look, but it was really the first instrument. It looks like a big organ. I'll show you a picture in a second, but it looks like a big organ, and literally each key is routed to a tiny piece of tape loop where as soon as you hit the key, it triggers one of the tape loops, so you can actually hear the thing. And what people were doing is actually having the music go across all these, so they'd have drums, they'd have bass, they'd have brass, they'd have strings across all the keys, and yeah, really, I mean, some really nice stuff happening there. The final one I want to say about, and I've got a picture of this in a minute, is the Fairlight. Now, the Fairlight is just 1979, that one, and it's an amazing sampling. Actually, it's one of the first computer kind of interfaces where the screen was actually a touch screen. So 1979 beat Apple products to it by having a touch screen. And the documentary that I've got, and I'll show you that in a second, actually shows Herbie Hancock actually demoing this particular Fairlight. So some of the components and techniques that you can use with this. Now, I won't go into massive detail here because I'm sure you can pause this video and have a look at this. Is basically one of the biggest components is RAM and ROM, and now that's how it's stored, how each of the individual audio tracks is stored. Okay, so that's one thing, and then the other thing for how these works is sample rate and bit depth, especially in the more digital era. Obviously, when it was analog, that didn't really matter because it just go onto tape and it was fine. But when you're looking at sampling in the digital era, you are looking at kind of quality, and that comes through sample rate and bit depth. Okay, and then it's some of the things that you can actually do with it. So like I said before, layering velocity, so laying a single hit, whereas if you hit the MIDI keyboard or the MIDI pads at harder pressure, you actually trigger a different sound. So that's one thing. And then reversing was another, and this idea of looping was another, where you'd have a drum pattern, it would just loop throughout a song or whatever. That's pretty much all I want to say about that, really. There's a few other techniques there, and we're going to cover a couple in a second, but I think that's kind of covered most of what I need to say there. So here's the first one. Now this is the Mellotron. I'll just bring my mouse into play. Now this documentary is really nice. It has an interview with the guy that that actually created the mellotron. He actually plays it, and he's got it all rigged up. But basically, you've got all these tape loops. So as soon as you hit a key, it triggers one of the tape loops, and each key has a different tape loop. And that's pretty much how that one works. It's fantastic. The actual quality of the instrument is out of this world, actually. Now here it is. Here's the Fairlight. Now, bring my mouse into play again. You can see you've got the normal mouse and keyboard. This is 1979, so you've got one of the first mouses of the keyboard. But then you've also got this really good interface where you can actually use this pen here. If you can see my mouse, use this pen here, and you can actually click on any of the keys to actually hear and preview the sounds. And you've got also click through all the different menus. Oh, sorry, the menus down here. Click through all the different menus to kind of get the right triggers that you want. So, I mean, miles and miles ahead of its time. And this the Fairlight was a whole unit: keyboard, computer, monitor, everything. I hate to think how much that costs. What have we got now? So sampling. This is the Roland TR-909. So this is used throughout the 80s, throughout the 90s for kind of hip hop dance tracks, and it's still used today in a lot of commercial tracks because the samples are just that good and they're that unique that you quite often you see people trying to emulate them. If you look in Logic or if you look in Ableton or Cubase, you'll see that there's normally packs where they emulate the 909 or the 808. And once again, there's a nice little demonstration video there if you want to have a little look at that as well. Now you've got one of the first big players in the sampling industry. Before Halion came along and before you had your EXS-24, you had this one here, the Giga Sampler. Now the Giga Sampler was just an immense piece of kit. It's a plug-in, but it was also a standalone unit where you'd actually call up your libraries of sounds and then you'd program them into your keyboard and you'd tamper them away which you wanted to, really, using all the various kind of effects and stuff. And it's really interesting. It's one of the main players. I mean, now if you look at this one compared to kind of the EXS-24 or Halion, you know, it looks fairly kind of basic, but this is where it all started really in the first instances. So we're going to go over to do a demonstration. We're just going to look at the two different kinds of sampling instrument, which is the instrument sampler, EXS-24 in this instance, and also the drum machine, and just kind of look at how they differ and how you might be able to use them for your own productions. So just give me 2 seconds while I switch screen. Okay. So here it is. Here is the EXS-24. Now this is just a general sampler, and this is what we've got so far, just a normal sound on it. And if you go to the default sounds, you can actually call up any of the kind of presets that you want. So, sorry, I'm on the wrong track here. Give me 2 seconds while I just set this up properly. Okay, so let's just use this one. For some reason that's not working properly. It's because I was in the wrong bank. Sorry about that, I had a bit of a moment there. So here we are, all my kind of sampled sounds that I want to pull up. So for instance, the first one we've got this classic piano. And these are all kind of built in. These are multi-timbral samplers, okay? So each note that I play on the keyboard has been sampled. So you've basically got multiple notes, rather than the early days of MIDI where one sample will be stretched out over all 88 keys. Now it's more common to see one sample either individually on a key or stretched out maybe over 2 or 3. And you'll see even the way as I go up, it still makes quite a good sound. Now, so you can call up in any sampler, you can call up any of their kind of sounds. And the idea with this particular sampler is to make organic sounds, to make sounds that exist in the real world, like classic pianos or classic guitars or whatever. But it can also allow you to map your own samples. And how you do that is using this edit button here. So with this edit button, I need to go back to the factory actually. Recall default, there we go. So here we are, here's a blank default one. The one we just saw had all the samples already loaded in, but I just wanted to show you how to do this, okay? So I've got this vocal sample here. Before I load it in, let me just play it, so you can hear it.
How long can I wait for you?
and this is just from the Logic Media Bay, okay? So once you've got that, and this is how I like to load them. There are other ways of loading samples where you can just drag and drop them from your hard drive or whatever, but this is the way I kind of like to do it. Or it's one of them. So just drag it on, and then you have your sample. Now, what you're going to notice down the bottom is that individual sample has been mapped across all 88 keys. Okay, there's no break there, it's just been mapped. So if I play that in its root position, hopefully this is the root position. Oh, no. Go down one more. Sorry about this.
How long
there it
can
is.
I wait for you?
There's the root one, but you heard when I played it as C3, got a bit of chipmunks going on. And then we can do harmonies. Okay, so that just shows you how you can map these things. Now, if you want to change this, you can easily do that. You've got the pitch setting here, which is the root note, and then you've got the range, so the low note to the high note. So if I press in C2 here and press enter, you'll see that now my very first note is C2. So if I play anything below that, which I'm now playing C1, you'll see that nothing happens, okay? It's not until I play C2 that I actually get that trigger. So if I want to map the high end, I can just map this to say C3. So now all I've got is one octave.
How long can I wait for you?
Okay, so that's the first thing you can do. Another, what you're going to notice here is if I let go of my map, if I let go of the keyboard, it stops. You can also change this to a one shot, which basically means if I let go of my keyboard, it just keeps playing, okay, until the sample is finished. So that's one thing you can do, the one shot. If you don't want it to kind of stutter,
how long can I wait for you?
You can just turn the one shot on and it'll play all the way through. The other thing is the reverse. So now I play it. Okay, so then it plays it in reverse. If you want to be really interesting, drag it on again. And now look, this is what I was talking about earlier about loading it via velocity. So now you've got these velocity settings where it could, at the moment, it's probably going to trigger both samples. So let me just set this up. So C2, C3. Okay, now you've got two samples, so it should play both of them.
How long can I wait for
Okay, now what you can do to kind of separate them out is you can come to your velocity and just kind of trigger the top zone when you get higher. Oh, they are linked. Take that back to 0. Take that to plus. It goes up to 127. I'm on the wrong one, aren't I? Silly ass. Okay, I'm missing a parameter here. That's actually volume. Sorry, I thought that was velocity. Show velocity. There we go. Sorry about that. So now when I select each of these samples, it will actually give me a range. So let's do the bottom one first, and we'll set this range. Let me just find out how to grab this. There we go. You have to grab it in a certain way, it's a bit annoying. Maybe it's just me being annoying. There we go. So now we have these two samples set up on different velocities. So if I press it lightly, it just plays one. If I play it hard, I might have to just adjust that a little bit more.
How long can I wait?
Okay, just give me 2 seconds. It's just set too low, that's all it is. Try it now.
How long?
There it is, and it triggers. So you have to get the velocity setting absolutely right. I would say that I'll probably just have to adjust this a little bit more to kind of get that exactly in the zone. So I can just change it. There you go, and you can see them change in blue depending on how hard I hit it. Okay, cool. Another thing you can do is actually set it so it loops on itself. So if you go to the view menu and you go down to zone loop, it adds another column. Now you can turn the loop on, so we do both. And now when I press the keyboard and hold it,
How long
it will just
can
loop.
I wait for you? How long can I wait for you?
Okay, you can also set the start time. So if you don't want it to start at the very beginning, you can actually set the start time. So if I grab this one and just take it up to about 300 or 400, you'll see it cuts off the beginning.
How long can I...